Have you ever imagined a woman so entitled that she would demand her entire neighborhood pay for her divorce? That's not a joke. That's exactly what happened in my community, and the story is so insane you'll barely believe it. It all started with a ridiculous notice taped to every single front door on our street. The message, written in bold letters as if it carried the weight of the law, said that every household was required to pay $70 for a so-called legal expense. At first, I stood on my porch, staring at the paper like it had to be some prank. But the more I read, the more serious it seemed. It even had a stamped header with the HOA name, as if that gave it legitimacy. The thing is, our HOA dues were already clearly broken down for landscaping, pool maintenance, trash collection, and security patrols. There had never been any sudden extra fees like this before. Naturally, confusion spread fast. I marched across to my neighbor's house with the paper in my hand, asking if they had received the same thing, and sure enough, every single door on the block had that same notice slapped on it. People were standing on porches holding the letter like it was a subpoena. There was no explanation, just a vague threat that failure to pay could result in penalties. The whole neighborhood was buzzing with whispers. Some folks thought maybe it was legitimate, since the HOA president, Karen, was notorious for pulling bizarre stunts in the past. Like fining someone because their wind chimes were too loud. Others thought it had to be some kind of mistake. But $70 per house wasn't pocket change, not when multiplied across dozens and dozens of homes. That was thousands of dollars disappearing into a mysterious pocket with no accountability. That same evening, a group of us gathered under the flickering lamppost at the end of the street. It wasn't a scheduled meeting, but frustration had boiled over so fast that people just spilled outside with their letters in hand. We started discussing what it could mean. One guy joked maybe Karen had blown the HOA funds on Botox and now wanted us to cover it. Another neighbor whispered maybe it was hush money for some scandal. Either way, one thing became clear. We weren't paying a dime until we got a real explanation. We agreed the upcoming HOA meeting would be the battleground, the moment to confront Karen face to face. The next night, the clubhouse meeting room was packed tighter than a courtroom on Judgment Day. Every chair was filled, people were standing against the walls, all clutching those letters like evidence in a trial. Then she walked in, Karen, strutting like she owned the world, dressed in a bright red power blazer with a smug grin plastered across her face. Her heels clicked on the floor as if she was announcing her authority with every step. She carried a fat folder of papers and set them down like she was about to deliver a historic speech. For a while, the meeting dragged on with the usual minor topics: curb repainting, trash collection schedules, some landscaping proposals. People were restless, waiting for the elephant in the room to be addressed. Finally, I raised my hand, holding the letter high in the air. "What exactly is this $70 fee for, Karen?" I asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room turned silent, all eyes on her. Karen paused, smirked, and then dropped the bomb. "As your HOA president, I have the authority to levy special fees when necessary. And right now, I am going through a divorce. It has been financially draining, and I believe it is only fair that the community supports me in this difficult time." You could have heard a pin drop. Several jaws literally fell open. One old man coughed like he was choking on his disbelief. I blinked, wondering if I had misheard her, but no. She had just told the entire neighborhood to fund her divorce. I couldn't hold it in and laughed out loud, which made her snap her eyes toward me in fury. "Who cares if you're getting a divorce?" I said, my voice ringing through the room. "You can't tax us for your personal life." "That's not how this works." A wave of agreement rippled through the crowd, neighbors nodding, emboldened by someone finally calling it out. Karen's smug grin vanished. Her face twisted with anger, and she slammed her folder shut like a gavel. "I have every right," she barked, stepping forward as if she wanted to claw my face off. "Being HOA president gives me the authority to collect what I see fit. Consider it a community contribution." The room erupted in chaos. Some neighbors shouted at her, others whispered nervously. A few even looked genuinely scared, worried about liens or fines. But not me. I felt heat rising inside me, the kind of anger that doesn't fade. That meeting ended in absolute madness, but one thing had become clear to me. Karen had gone too far. Divorce or not, this wasn't about financial hardship. This was about power, abuse, and treating the neighborhood like her personal ATM. That night, when I got home, I pulled out my binder of old HOA records. I had saved every statement, every budget report, every annual breakdown since moving in. Flipping through the pages, I started noticing things that didn't add up. Whole sections of funds labeled with vague nonsense like administrative emergencies and miscellaneous obligations. I knew those weren't related to landscaping or pool maintenance. I dug deeper, comparing old figures with new ones, highlighting discrepancies. The more I looked, the uglier it got. Funds were missing, shifted, hidden under creative labels. Karen's surprise divorce fee wasn't the start of her corruption. It was just the latest trick. The next morning, I knocked on my neighbor Denise's door and showed her the papers. Her eyes widened and she nearly dropped her coffee. "Oh my God," she whispered. "She's been stealing from us." Word spread quickly. Soon, several of us were gathering in my garage, turning into amateur detectives. People brought their own records, screenshots, even whispers from former HOA board members. One rumor suggested Karen had pocketed funds under the table for years. Piece by piece, the picture formed. Vacations, designer handbags, salon trips. It was all being funneled straight out of our HOA dues. The energy shifted from confusion to determination. We weren't just annoyed neighbors anymore. We were a team, building a case, preparing a noose of evidence that Karen wouldn't escape. But of course she didn't know that yet. Karen strutted around the neighborhood like a queen the next day, knocking on doors, reminding people their payments were due, even threatening an elderly couple with penalties if they didn't hand over the money by Friday. Her arrogance only fueled our fire. Every threat she made, every word she spat, we documented. By the end of the week, our file was thick enough to bury her presidency and expose her schemes. The stage was set, and the day of reckoning was closer than she realized. The HOA meeting that night felt different. Less fear, more anticipation. Everyone had their phones out, ready to catch Karen's downfall. She marched in like a queen, heels striking, papers in hand, convinced she still controlled the room. But her confidence lasted only seconds. I stood and spoke first, cutting her off. "Before you demand another payment, let's talk about where the last ones went." Denise wheeled in a box of receipts and slammed it on the table. The room went silent, then phones shot up to record. I pulled out the first paper, a luxury hotel bill. Another, handbags listed as landscaping. Another, spa days under miscellaneous. Gasps filled the room. Karen's face turned crimson as she lunged to snatch the evidence, but neighbors blocked her. She screamed, "I'm still president! I have authority!" But the crowd was no longer afraid. Voices rose, laughter cut her down, and the once untouchable HOA queen stood cornered and powerless. I raised my voice so every camera caught it. "Karen, this is theft. We've already filed with our attorney. Your reign is over." The room erupted. Cheers, shouts, the sound of justice. Within weeks, the lawsuit stripped her of everything. Her position, her false power, her stolen luxuries. Ordered to repay thousands, she became a disgraced shadow of the bully she once was. The neighborhood finally felt free. Karen thought rules bent to her will, but greed always catches up. She walked into that meeting expecting obedience and walked out with nothing.